Hello everybody. Welcome to the big comfy chair. And this is a really good day for tea and books because it is rainy and cold. It's July, but you wouldn't know it out there. And that's not too great for me because I was sort of thinking lighter beach reads for the summer. So the vibe is maybe going to be a little bit off, but I will do my best. And the tea that I'm drinking today is actually masala chai from India, and it is wonderful and very fragrant. And you'll see later as I talk about the books that I picked for today why I'm drinking chai tea. It's really wonderfully warming on a chilly, rainy summer day. So thank you for joining me today. Be sure and share with me what type of tea you're drinking today, if you are, or if you're drinking coffee. You can even tell me what you're reading right now, and I will get back to you after I'm finished my little bit here. So today I'm very excited because I'm going to talk about a book just to start off that is one of my absolute favorite books so far of the year. And I was actually just talking to Kyle about it the other day because Kyle is reading the same book right now and he is also loving it. So I would really recommend this one. I'm going to use a lot of superlatives talking about it because I like it so much. And the book is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. Now, you may think the name Kazuo Ishiguro sounds familiar, and you may know who it is, but if you just think it sounds familiar, let me just refresh your memory that he is a British author. He wrote Remains of the Day, which was made into a lovely film with Emma Thompson and Anthony Hopkins. And he also, one of his other famous novels, Never Let Me Go, was very impactful and sort of in the speculative fiction area or perhaps dystopian future. I don't know if you can really even say dystopian. It's interesting, but I love his writing because his writing is just very luminous and he really explores his books are very simple, and this story in particular is written in a very simple, luminous prose, but it's very, very deeply leveled in terms of what he's trying to say about things. So it's an interesting book to read because it's very readable because there are lots of questions that come up that you wonder about, that keep you going so that the plot kind of keeps moving. But by the same token, it's very, very warm, very bright. I found it to be a fairly uplifting book. I guess there could be an argument. Maybe you can argue with me about it after you read it. But certainly, I found it to be not just a beautifully written book and a beautiful story, but I was just completely in love with the narrator. So the narrator, obviously, as you can guess from the title, Clara and the Sun. The narrator is Clara. And Clara is what's known as an AF. This is in a very near future world, possibly just an alternate world in a similar time period, where children often have these AFs, which are artificial friends. So it's sort of like an artificial intelligence or a human-like robot. And they will often have them as companions. And so Clara is one of these AFs, and she is the narrator. So, but don't worry that this is one of those books where the computers go crazy and take over mankind. That's not what's happening here at all. If anything, it's the opposite, that you learn about Clara and you learn about humanity through Clara's eyes as she's learning about them. And she's just such a very bright and interesting character. And just being inside of her mind, she's so empathetic and yet she's so innocent simultaneously. She just has a wonderful, wonderful voice. So the part I'm going to read, I'm going to just set up a little bit. At the very beginning of the book, it starts with the store that sells these AFs. And so Clara and her friend Rosa, who's one of the other AFs, they're obviously wanting to get bought. So it's almost like the feeling you would have of kids in an orphanage waiting for parents to pick them. And one of the interesting things is when the AFs speak to each other when the manager is not around, and they have all of these ideas about the world that they share with each other. And one of the things that's particularly interesting is their attitude towards the sun, because these particular AFs are built with a solar power backup. And as a result, they have a reaction to the sun where they find the sun so warm and pleasant, and they almost develop religious feelings. It's sort of the memory, that the thought that you might have of an ancient civilization that's looking at the sun and developing a mythology around it. And so you see that happening within these AFs. And I'm just going to start at a point when Rosa and Clara have actually been put in the main window by the manager, and they're so excited because all of the AFs want to be in the main window display, because then they can see the sun all the time. So I'm just going to read a little bit from that part. The day went on, the sun kept us warm, and I could see Rosa was very happy. But I noticed too that she had hardly looked at anything, fixing her eyes constantly on the first tow-away zone sign just in front of us. Only when I pointed out something to her would she turn her head, but then she'd lose interest and go back to looking at the sidewalk outside and the sign. Rosa only looked elsewhere for any length of time when a passerby paused in front of the window. In those circumstances, we both did as manager had taught us. We put on neutral smiles and fixed our gaze across the street on a spot midway up the RPO building. It was very tempting to look more closely at a passerby who came up, but manager had explained that it was highly vulgar to make eye contact at such a moment. Only when a passerby specifically signaled to us or spoke to us through the glass were we to respond, but never before. Some of the people who paused turned out not to be interested in us at all. They just wanted to take off their sports shoe and do something to it, or to press their oblongs. Some, though, came right up to the glass and gazed in. Many of these would be children of around the age for which we were most suitable, and they seemed happy to see us. A child would come up excitedly, alone or with their adult, then point, laugh, pull a strange face, tap the glass, wave. Once in a while, and I soon got better at watching those at the window while appearing to gaze at the RPO building, a child would come to stare at us, and there would be a sadness there, or sometimes an anger, as though we'd done something wrong. A child like this could easily change the next moment and begin laughing or waving like the rest of them, but after our second day in the window, I learned quickly to tell the difference. I tried to talk to Rosa about this the third or fourth time a child like that had come, but she smiled and said, "Clara, you worry too much. I'm sure that child was perfectly happy. How could she not be on a day like this? The whole city's so happy today." But I brought it up with manager at the end of our third day. She had been praising us, saying we'd been beautiful and dignified in the window. The lights in the store had been dim by then, and we were rear store, leaning against the wall, some of us browsing through the interesting magazines before our sleep. Rosa was next to me, and I could see from her shoulders she was already half asleep. So when the manager asked if I enjoyed the day, I took the chance to tell her about the sad children who'd come to the window. "Clara, you're quite remarkable," manager said, keeping her voice soft so as not to disturb Rosa and the others. "You notice and absorb so much." She shook her head as though in wonder. Then she said, "What you must understand is that we're a very special store. There are many children out there who would love to be able to choose you, choose Rosa, any one of you here, but it's not possible for them. You're beyond their reach. That's why they come to the window to dream about having you, but then they get sad." Manager, a child like that. Would a child like that have an AF at home? Perhaps not. Certainly not one like you. So if sometimes a child looks at you in an odd way with bitterness or sadness, says something unpleasant through the glass, don't think anything of it. Just remember, a child like that is most likely frustrated. A child like that, with no AF, would surely be lonely. Yes, that too, manager said quietly. Lonely. Yes. She lowered her eyes and was quiet, so I waited. Then suddenly she smiled and, reaching out, removed gently from my grasp the interesting magazine I'd been observing. Good night, Clara. Be as wonderful as you were today, tomorrow, and don't forget, you and Rose are representing us to the whole street. It was almost midway through our fourth morning in the window when I saw a taxi slowing down, its driver leaning right out so the other taxis would let him come across the traffic lanes to the curb in front of our store. Josie's eyes were on me as she got out onto the sidewalk. She was pale and thin, and as she came toward us, I could see her walk wasn't like that of the other passerby. She wasn't slow exactly, but she seemed to take stock after each step to make sure she was still safe and wouldn't fall. I estimated her age as 14 and a half. Once she was close enough so all the pedestrians were passing behind her, she stopped and smiled at me. Hi, she said through the glass. Hey, can you hear me? Rosa kept staring ahead at the RPO building as she was supposed to do, but now I'd been addressed, I was able to look directly at the child, return her smile and nod encouragingly. Really? Josie said, though of course I didn't know yet that was her name. I can hardly hear myself. You can really hear me? I nodded again and she shook her head as if very impressed. Wow. She glanced over her shoulder. Even this movement she made with caution to the taxi from which she'd just emerged. Its door was as she'd left it, hanging open across the sidewalk, and there were two figures still in the back seat, talking and pointing to something beyond the pedestrian crossing. Josie seemed pleased her adults weren't about to get out, and took one more step forward till her face was almost touching the window. I saw you yesterday, she said. I recalled our previous day, but finding no memory of Josie, looked at her with surprise. Oh, don't feel bad or anything. There's no way you would have seen me. I was like in a taxi going by, not even that slow, but I saw you in the window, and that's why I got Mum to stop here, right here. She glanced back, again with that carefulness. Wow, she's still talking with Mrs. Jeffries. Expensive way to talk, right? That taxi meter just keeps turning over. I could then see how when she laughed, her face filled with kindness, but strangely, it was at the same moment I first wondered if Josie might be one of those lonely children manager and I had talked about. She glanced over to Rosa, who was still gazing dutifully at the RPO building, then said, Your friend's really cute. Even as she said this, Josie's eyes were already back on me. She went on looking at me quietly for several seconds, and I became worried her adults would get out before she could say anything more. But then she said, Know what? Your friend will make a perfect friend for someone out there. But yesterday we were driving by and I saw you and I thought, that's her. That's the AF I've been looking for. She laughed again. Sorry, maybe that sounds disrespectful. She turned once more to the taxi, but the figures in the back showed no signs of getting out. Are you French? She asked. You look kind of French. I smiled and shook my head. There were these two French girls, Josie said, came to our last meeting. Both had their hair that way, neat and short like you. Looked cute. She regarded me silently for another moment, and I thought I saw another small sign of sadness. But I was still quite new then and couldn't be sure. Then she brightened, saying, Hey, don't you guys get hot sitting there like that? Do you need a drink or something? I shook my head and raised my hands palms up to indicate the loveliness of the sun's nourishment falling over us. Oh yeah, I wasn't thinking. You love being in the sunshine, right? She turned again, this time to look up the building tops. At that moment, the sun was in the gap of the sky, and Josie screwed her eyes up immediately and turned back to me. I don't know how you do that. I mean, keep looking at that sun that way without being dazzled. I can't do it even for a second. She put a hand to her forehead and then turned away once more, this time looking not at the sun, but to somewhere near the top of the RPO building. After 5 seconds, she turned back to me again. I guess for you guys, where you are, the sun must go down behind that big building, right? That must mean you never get to see where he really goes down. That building must always get in the way. She looked over quickly to check the adults were still inside the taxi, then went on. Where we live, there's nothing in the way. From up in my room, you can see exactly where the sun goes down, the exact place he goes to at night. I must have looked surprised, and at the edge of my vision I could see that Rosa, forgetting herself, was now staring at Josie in astonishment. Can't see where he comes up in the morning, though, Josie said. The hills and trees kind of get in the way. Kind of like here, I guess. Things always in the way. But the evening's something else. Over that side where my room looks out, it's just wide and empty. If you came and lived with us, you'd see. One adult, then another, climbed from the taxi onto the sidewalk. Josie had not seen them, but perhaps she heard them, for she began to talk more quickly. Cross my heart, you can see the exact place he goes down. So that gives you a little bit of the flavor of the kind of gentleness that Clara has, and her relationship beginning here with Josie. So Josie is quite ill, it turns out, and that ends up being a major part of the story going forward in terms of Clara and her relationship with Josie and with Josie's family. And you find out more about that as you go through, but since that's sort of one of the mysteries that draws you through the story, I don't want to give too much away. But I would say that the story definitely touches on a lot of things that are very much in our minds right now, feelings about servitude, feelings about racism, being a minority, religion. I mean, I found it a story that just touched on so many different things and yet still had this beautiful hopefulness at its core. So like I say, that is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, the Nobel Prize winning author from the UK. And that is my first recommendation. The other two are definitely much lighter. They're much more ones that you can enjoy. Not that Clara and the Sun isn't light in its own way, but these other ones are well, they're romances, but they're excellent stories. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors by Sonali Dev. So some of you may have read this already or may be familiar with Sonali Dev. She is an Indian American writer, and she writes a lot of romances. And this is the first in a series of 3 that she has written that take inspiration from Jane Austen novels. So this one, though, what I like about it was it had this beautiful twist in it. And all 3 books are connected to the same family who originally they were Rajas in India, and they lived in a big palace. And then they came and they bought this big estate in California. And so they're all living in America now, but they're all connected. And so it has a little bit of a, if you read the book Crazy Rich Asians and enjoyed it, this probably would be your cup of tea. Only in this book, the Pride and Prejudice is flipped a little bit, because even though the chef is named DJ and Darcy is one of his first, one of the parts of the DJ, the one who is playing the proud person this time around is actually the woman. So the roles are flipped, and she is a neurosurgeon, and she is very proud, but not in the way that he thinks. And they have all of the interactions that you would expect in Pride and Prejudice, but it's just done in such a fun way because he's a chef and she's a neurosurgeon, and the conversations they have, it's just very entertaining. And that's why I was drinking the chai tea, because both of these romances that I'm going to talk about are inspired not just by India and its culture, but also by cooking. And there's a lot of talk about food and chai, and it made me very hungry reading these books. But it was beautifully described, and you know, as long as you have access to some Indian food and some chai tea, you'll really find that they're a good accompaniment to reading these books. So in this one, Trisha has just finished working at the hospital. She's had a little bit of a problem in the past with her family, but she's been asked to come to this special dinner because her brother is running for governor or something, and everyone is so proud of him. He's the great hope of the family, and she's supposed to be there to support, but she gets there too late and misses the catering. The food has already been cleared at the point that she gets there, and she's just starving hungry. So she heads back to the main kitchen. This is in her parents' home. She heads back to the kitchen to see if she can find something that she can eat. And that's when she meets this chef for the first time. She wandered through the main kitchen, which was as pristine as it always was, made her way down the long corridor to the working kitchen in the back of the house, and pushed through the heavy swing door. If this had been just a family gathering and her grandma had been down here running the show, Ahi would have put a plate of food aside for Trisha, knowing how hungry she would be after work. Maybe she should go back up and tell Ahi about the grant. She would care. Her stomach groaned again, and seriously, she was this close to fainting. The fact that she hated kitchens made things worse, especially when the kitchen looked like this, a million ingredients and dishes strewn about the endless granite surfaces. Nonetheless, she soldiered on. On the stove sat a huge pot with a clear lid that looked promising, but it was too close to another pot on an open flame. She looked around for help. For all the cooking paraphernalia lying in wait of something, there wasn't a soul here tending to it at all. Who left something thick and molten bubbling on a stove unattended? Carefully reaching past it, she lifted the lid of the other dish and found pure, white, long-grained rice mixed with green peas and bright orange carrots. The intoxicating smell jabbed her straight in the olfactory cortex. Drool gushed into her mouth. "May I help you?" She jumped and dropped the lid. It slammed into the bubbling pot, making the thing teeter on its side. Trisha stumbled back, trying to get away from the splash of molten liquid. The man in a white chef's jacket, who had just scared the living crap out of her, dived at the careening pot and saved it from crashing to the ground. "Bloody hell!" he snapped, completely ignoring the fact that she had almost just had her toes burned off. "What do you think you're doing? Who the hell let you into my kitchen?" Her heart slammed in her chest. Excuse me? Was he actually yelling at her? As though she were some sort of deviant child? And since when was this his kitchen? This was her damn home. "You almost tipped over my caramel. My caramel. It's my pièce de résistance," he said in a tone no one should ever have taken with her. Who the hell said things like pièce de résistance? That too in perfect French. But his voice was so enraged, she almost took a step back. Almost, because it was her damn home. "Maybe you should not have left it unattended then," she said icily. His skin flushed red. He swallowed and ground his jaw. "You're right. I shouldn't have. I apologize." Anger flashed in his eyes and not a trace of apology. "To be fair, I wasn't exactly expecting anyone to be snooping around my food and tipping over my pots the moment I stepped away for one bloody second." I was not snooping. Were they really having this conversation? "You startled me and almost burned me." He had started to turn away, but he spun back around at that. "All you had to do was set the pot straight and no one would have been burned." He enunciated each word with exaggerated calm. If one more person spoke to her today like she was an imbecile, she was going to wring someone's neck. Set it straight. You want me to touch a boiling pot? Do you have any idea what these hands are worth? His eyebrows rose in disbelief, as though the words she had said were somehow incomprehensible. He raised both hands, done with this conversation. Then he turned off the stove with more of that exaggerated calm, walked to the sink, and stuck his hands under running water. Oh no, he had just set the pot straight with his bare hands. Are you okay? Tricia asked, her annoyance slipping a bit. Do I look okay, miss? She registered for the first time that he had an accent, a very British accent, and those tightly clipped notes gave his words the exact impact of a slap. God help her. She had tried to be nice. He just stood there taking deep breaths, his very stiff, very broad back, expanding and then releasing with deliberation. Between those football player shoulders and that ridiculous chef's hat, he looked so large, so tall that she did take a step back this time so she didn't have to lean her head back to take him in. He turned the water off and inspected his hands. They had to be hurting horribly. Do you want me to take a look? She asked his back, feeling just the tiniest bit sorry for him. He threw a look at the ceiling as though praying for patience and turned around with unmissable reluctance. She made a beckoning gesture with her fingers. Let me. He kept his hands by his sides. As I said, I'm fine. Thank you all the same. With nothing more than that, he gave her his back again and started spooning caramel into a bowl. When she didn't run off the way he evidently expected her to, he half turned back toward her again. If you don't mind, I'd rather do my job than stand around calculating the value of your hands. Her confusion must have shown on her face because he drew another annoyingly exaggerated breath. You asked me if I had any idea what your hands were worth? He was doing that over-enunciating thing again, and newsflash, it sounded even more condescending in a British accent. She'd had enough. I'm a surgeon, she said, mirroring his enunciation and feeling like a prized fool for doing it. Our hands are important to the work we do. This only made the scowl return to his face. Good information. Congratulations. And I'm the chef, and I still have dessert to save before someone else comes by and tries to destroy it. So there you go. You can see a little bit there of it's a very entertaining book. It's your typical romantic meeting that goes awry, but it's just like I say, it's so much fun to watch, especially with the switched Darcy and Elizabeth sort of roles, to see how it all plays out, and you know, to read a lot about wonderful food while you're at it. And the last book that I'm going to talk about today is also based on a familiar romance. And this is a book by a Toronto author, Uzma Jalaluddin. And she is actually, she's actually a teacher in Toronto, but she also is she writes a column for the Toronto Star as well. So, this book is lovely. It's very Toronto. It's all based in a Scarborough neighborhood that has a really high Southeast Asian population, and lots of wonderful restaurants and stores. And in the book, they call it the Golden Crescent. And it's wonderful. There's all kinds of little nods. She even talks at one point about Kawartha Dairy ice cream being the best ice cream in the world and this sort of thing. So there's a lot of fun little Toronto nods in it. And this book is inspired by another famous story. So I have a real history with this story and am very familiar with it because it was first I think it was a Polish or Hungarian play that was translated into English called Perfumery. And then that play was made into a very famous film called Little Shop Around the Corner with Jimmy Stewart. And I loved that film as well. And then that actually was made into, much later, a modern film with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan called You've Got Mail. It's also actually been made into a musical as well that I saw at Shaw Festival. But the idea about this romance that makes it lovely is it's based on writing. So it's the crux of the story is that basically a man and woman are writing to each other and they're falling in love as they're writing to each other. And then in the real world, these two people meet each other, this man and woman, and they just immediately hate each other and they are very hostile towards each other. They're sort of in competition and they end up this very antagonistic relationship. So at any rate, that's what this book, as Hannah Khan carries on, is a little bit along that line. But it's just a very rich book. There's so much, like I say, there's so much of the culture in it. The main character is just so interesting. Hannah, she wants to be a radio announcer. So I'm going to try and read to you from the beginning just because I really love this, and it's going to be a little challenging because Hannah actually does a podcast, and she does it under the name Anna BGR. And she has been doing this for months, and she's got this this fan who's been listening to her for 5 months, and he's just a huge fan of her podcast. And so after her most recent podcast, they're having one of their many chats, and they've gotten to know each other really well, chatting back and forth. So what I'm reading is actually their chat back and forth. So I'm going to start his part by saying Stanley P, which is his name, and he likes to pretend that he's a bot. He's not a real person. And then I'm going to read her name before her part just to help you keep it clear. And I hope that works out because it's just, I find, a very delightful interplay. Stanley P. Happy 5-month pod-iversary. According to InaccurateStatistics.com, most podcasts don't make it past month 4. So you beat the odds. I'd send you flowers, but that would imply I knew your name, mailing address, and flower preference, and that would cause my bot senses to melt into a confused puddle. Anna BGR. That might be amusing. Okay, my real name is ... Stanley P. Wait, what? Seriously? Anna BGR. Psych. Psych, 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 psych. Stanley P. So cruel when I'm trying to congratulate you. Any news on the mysterious dream job interview? Anna BGR. No news is good news, right? Stanley P. Definitely, especially when you're going after the highly specialized job of unicorn wrangler, toddler exorcist, erotic knitter. Anna BGR. An erotic knitter can't possibly be a thing. Stanley P. So you're saying you're definitely not a paper-folding priestess. Anna BGR. That's as likely as anyone under the age of 40 actually being named Stanley. Stanley P. I've offered to reveal my true identity. Aren't you a little curious about the incredibly hot, accomplished, muscular man behind Stanley P? Now the chat stops at that point where she starts to think. Was I curious about Stanley P? Oh, he had no idea. I was in the corner booth of Three Sisters Biryani Poutine, the restaurant my family owned and ran in the heart of the Golden Crescent neighborhood in the East End of Toronto. I was supposed to be cleaning in anticipation of customers, but instead I was texting Stanley P., my very first and most loyal listener. Over the past 5 months, we had moved from polite commenter and podcaster to friendly acquaintances to genuine friends who texted every day, all without exchanging a single personal detail. Yet when I closed my eyes, I could imagine his smile. It would be shy, tentative. He would be kind, a thinker and listener with a mischievous glint in his eye. Oh, I knew I would love his laugh. The phone pinged in my hand. I looked down at the direct messaging app we started using a few months after he began commenting on my podcast. Stanley P. I think you may be the person who knows me best in the world right now, and I don't even know your real name. My fingers hovered over the screen. I could tell him who I really was. I pictured myself typing it out. Well, my real name is Hannah. I'm 24 and I live with my parents in the most diverse suburb in the world, Scarborough, in the East End of Toronto. You already know that I'm a South Asian Muslim, but you don't know that I wear a hijab and I work 2 jobs. One is at Three Sisters Biryani Poutine, the restaurant my mother has been running for the past 15 years, and another is at CJKP, a local indie radio station where I intern. Though work is a bit of a misnomer, since neither position pays me actual money and both positions have a limited life expectancy. The former because our restaurant is in trouble, and the latter because my internship is coming to an end and I have no idea what comes next. I'm trying not to panic about either situation. Nope. Stanley P. didn't need to know any of that. I could stick with some simple biographical details, maybe. I have an older sister named Fazila and a brother-in-law named Fahim, and in about 4 months they will make me a Kala. That means aunt in case you're a non-Urdu speaking Stanley P. As for my dad, I hesitated. As for my dad, it had been a long time since I had had to explain about Baba to a stranger. It used to be a daily occurrence as we navigated among hospitals, doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, and personal support workers. As Baba's condition stabilized, his world had shrunk, along with the need for explanations to strangers. In that surreal way that online friendships worked, Stanley P. was still technically a stranger. A stranger I spoke with daily, one who knew my deepest hopes and fears, but not any details about my real lived existence. I picked up the phone and finally typed carefully, "It's easier if we keep things the way they have always been. There's a lot going on in my life right now, and I'm not sure I can handle another complication." Another longer pause. Imaginary Stanley P. had his brow furrowed, but he would understand and he would respond. He always had a response. Stanley P. Is this complication relationship shaped? I almost laughed out loud at the question, but then my mother would have realized I was goofing off in the dining room and made me help her in the restaurant kitchen. Things had shifted between Stanley and me over the past month. Lately he had been hinting at more, but had never come out and asked, but then neither had I. More, what does the future hold shaped? A relationship would be easier to deal with than family business stuff. Stanley P. Our lives are running parallel. I have business and family shaped complications too. That new project I was telling you about is finally happening. No relationship complication for me either. Stanley P. was single too. A flush crept along my collarbone and up through the roots of my hair, which was pulled back neatly under my bright pink hijab. I shifted in my seat. He probably hadn't always been single like me, but still, I knew he wasn't asking me. And part of me was tempted not to answer. Instead, I fell back on our usual humor. Anna BGR. Why can't I be the complicated one? You always have to copy me. Stanley P. It's what a bot does. The StanBot is also programmed to give excellent advice and tell hilarious jokes and is available for revelations of real names or the exchange of pictures, phone numbers. Just say the word. I'd love to get to know you better. My stomach jolted with awareness at his words. I wanted more too, but it wasn't as easy for me. All the bravery I possessed was currently being put toward other things, and I wasn't sure I had the energy to pursue whatever this thing between us was turning out to be. So there you go. A moment later, she's about to meet somebody she really instantly hates. So it's again, a very entertaining, fun story. Both of these stories were just wonderful in terms of really experiencing loving family and a wonderful culture and lots of descriptions of great food, and I would really recommend them. Oh, and while I'm on it, that was Hannah Kahn Carries On, the Toronto-based story. But while I go back for a moment to Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors, I want to mention that her second book is, I'm just trying to remember right now, her second book is Recipe for Persuasion, and her third book, I think, is just coming out, and it's In Sense and Sensibility. So there's 3 different books all dealing with the same family, all inspired by different Jane Austen novels. And once again, the one we started off with today was Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed hearing about these books, and I hope you check them out. And if you do, let me know whether you like them or not. And I hope it's a nice enough day later that everybody gets to go outside. And we'll see you next time. I believe the next Tea and Books will be Kyle, and that will be August the 5th. And if you haven't already heard, the library is back open again for browsing of the shelves. So I hope to see you soon. Have a good day.